So in 1798, Beethoven decided to use for his Piano Sonata number 7, the one in D Major Opus 10 number 3, the first movement, only quarter notes and eighth notes. So a rather heavy notation structure. And this score resulted in a notation that is remarkably in line with the old pure alla breve, described as a time signature often that requires a severe and massive performance, very heavy. But at the same time he did something weird, connecting that notation, that heavy notation, to the Italian tempo word presto. So is there a conflict? Did he make a mistake or not? Let's try to find out. So what's up everybody, and welcome to this Wednesday video in which I share some thoughts, some experiments, some background information, some context with you on this channel that's all about exploring the music from Bach to Beethoven, hopefully to inspire you on your journey as a musician or as a music lover. A few days ago I have uploaded this Piano Sonata number 7 of Beethoven, the D major, first movement only, and I will do that again next Monday in another tempo, but that's for later in this video. And indeed there is some friction there between this heavy notation and the word presto. And also I can read in your comments that for this sonata in particular it gives a little bit of a shock because we are used to way faster performances than the one I did. So let's dive a little bit into the context here, and I'm not promising you that I will give all the answers because this is a really complicated matter, but it is worth our time to dive into this subject because we can shed light on some aspects from a certain perspective that might enhance our view of what could be meant by Beethoven. So as a point of departure for my performance of that Beethoven Sonata first movement of the Monday video, we'll link it here or here actually on the info card if you would like to check that recording out first. That was based on a metronome number given by Czerny and Moscheles. Now, two things here. First, taking a metronome number that was given to us by our colleague musicians early 19th century is not something that you do because of lack of inspiration. I sometimes read that, but the opposite is the case because it takes you often outside your comfort zone as a musician. And so to create or to recreate a balance around a tempo that you may not be familiar with is often very difficult. The most difficult exercise I did, it was in the Grave of the Partitik. I also will link that video here. We need the pianoforte for that because there we are in the expansion also of sound, for which the clavichord is simply not romantic enough. But anyway, that's for another video. But also here it was very challenging. I've made a recording in the past of this piece. It was never released on CD, but it was a little bit faster than this. So also for me there is a challenge sometimes in applying these metronome marks. So it's not, I do not take them just by lack of inspiration. On the contrary, I would say. However, if you do so and if you persist, you will see light at the end of the tunnel, and often you will end up with a totally new perspective and even a new language of the music that we all know so well. And often also you will hear echoes of a time that was before Beethoven. Often C.P.E. Bach is then very close to that master, and that makes sense seeing the tradition in which Beethoven stands. Another thing here is that we have 10 metronome numbers from Czerny and Moscheles. Both of those musicians, they were very close to Beethoven, and they by far have given us the most interesting and the most consistent metronomizations of works by Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven. So if we see the metronome numbers given by Moscheles in 5 of his editions, they share the same number, all half note 132. And Czerny is a little bit different, as with all the editions of Czerny. The numbers, they don't shift too much, but sometimes they're a little bit faster, sometimes a little bit slower. So also there we see of the 5 editions that Czerny made, 3 of them have half note 132. So exactly the same as Moscheles, and you can trust me that they didn't look in each other's scores. So it's very remarkable how these metronome numbers, also for Mozart, they line up with each other so well. Czerny gave also a slower one even than I did, 126. for the half note and also a faster one, 152, which is a very interesting metronome number as well. We talk about that later. So since 8 of the 10 metronome numbers here were 132, I just took that tempo. And indeed, if you then listen to the beginning, the quarter notes that you hear there, they are a little bit of that presto feel. They don't give us that presto feeling that we expect in a piece that has the Italian tempo word of presto. So I will play with just a few bars, and in this tempo. So that's 132. I will not go into detail on the single beat and double beat reading. I will link here a video if you would like to find out more. If this is your first time that you hear talking about single beat, double beat, I'm using the old metrical, I think historical reading of the metronome numbers as a speed indication. So where the note value represents the tactus, which is the twofold unity, so up, down, and the ticks of the metronome represent the beats of the ticks, the beats of the conductor of the ticks of the metronome. In this case, half note 132 very easily is to be seen as half note is the tactus, 132 are the quarter notes, is the individual 2 quarter notes forming the unity of the tactus, up, down. So, in a nutshell. Okay, 132 is this tempo. And I will only use that shotgun microphone. The sound of the clavichord will be awful. That's by no means a microphone that's made to capture an instrument, but you can listen to the recording if you want, captured by the Neumann microphones, and that's a little bit of a different sound. So that's this tempo. We could dive for hours on talking on these first 4 bars only, and maybe I should do that, and maybe in a live stream. We have to start the live streams again, but in some weeks we are working so hard on releasing the Pachelbel Hexachordum Apollinis. More on that in the future, but I will not go into the background why this could work as such, why this could be meant, what this could mean as an effect or as an emotion. Just looking to the tempo, then indeed this is not a really presto feel. But we do hear quarter notes, and that's interesting. Further on, second theme. Here we hear a very orchestral sound where the left hand almost is a kind of fagot sound. Check the tempo. So overall this tempo works actually really well. We are there with the word presto, but on that in a second. I would like to do an exercise with you now and reverse the thing. So imagine we all are Beethoven and we have an idea in our mind, and we want to have it in a score. Of course, that's what the composer does. So let's just imagine for a moment that this tempo of 132 for the quarter note is the tempo that you would like to have. And again, that's up for debate, but let's just fix that element because other elements can become clear then. And so which are the options that we would have being Beethoven? So obviously he has used this notation that he has with quarter notes in a pure alla breve form, which means that you will not have faster note values than 8 notes, and you will not have major harmony changes more than 1 a bar. That's the old, very old-fashioned, in fact, alla breve, which can represent, of course, what he wants. What you have then is a very strong accent on 1, a somewhat strong accent on 3, a little bit less. He could have used a 2/4 bar structure, but the problem with that is that you would have a strong accent every bar. So the accents are not indicated, but of course they are. If you use a 2/4 bar, you know as a player that you have to give an accent on each first note. He could have used 8 notes and then we would change the complete notation. But if we still stick to that same tempo, then in 8 notes, two things occur. First, we would have a very strong accent 1 and 3 perhaps, but we would have a tempo indication of andante at the maximum. And perhaps this atmosphere, the mood, the effect of this piece is nothing of an andante. It has so much humor and so much contrast and so much good feeling. And an andante often is used for rather serious pieces. So that's one indication of the tempo he used. There are not so many different options then. If you go to the second theme, there the 8 notes become, you cannot say that it is slow. So again there he could have used a 2/4 structure in which perhaps even he would change the, he had to change then the 8 notes into 16th notes. Then again the tempo would be andante, which I doubt it would be. So if we would stick to this tempo, and that's just a reflection I make and I share with you here, there is not so much else than this notation that he came up with. But now the term presto. If the Italian word presto would have been left out here, I think there is no discussion that this tempo, this alla breve, is very natural around this 64 half note. If you take an old-fashioned fugue of Bach, I mean old-fashioned even in the time where Bach lived, like for instance the F major toccata and then the fugue of that. I've made an organ CD with that piece. I'll just share with you 5 seconds. So there also you have this heavy performance of 8 notes at the maximum speed in around 60/2. There is actually not much discussion on those tempi because on those organs simply it doesn't work if you play it faster. So in that regard, just comparing this notation with a Bach fugue in that pure alla breve form, then you could say, well, 132 is even kind of speeding up to that half note 60, but it's not presto. Now, at the end of the 18th century, and now I'm just sharing with you what I could imagine that is the case here. At the end of the 18th century, you see a simplification in many things, in time signatures that are disappearing. In fact, Leopold Mozart already in 1756 is in fact advocating for leaving out many time signatures and simplifying the things. But by simplifying that, then you leave out also information to the player, which then eventually led to perhaps kind of misunderstandings of that, and then the metronome came. No surprise in my opinion, because that for that generation of people was the ultimate solution in solving all the problems, not knowing that today we are breaking our heads in what they exactly meant. So here, if we start from the idea that also the C stroke was left out in many early 19th century editions, which today often are seen as editions that have many mistakes, but I believe that they were a result of that simplification of notation. I will share with you another really interesting source of an early 19th century score, talking about the long and short appoggiatura as the old system of the 18th century that has been transcribed into the new system. So leaving out the C with the stroke, as often happens, not in this case however, means that the notation on its own is what should guide the performer. And in fact, if you would leave out the C with the stroke here and replace it with the normal C of common time, then An informed performer knows that the notation here is in alla breve, so you have to double the tempo in relationship to the comment time. And there is something that might be at stake here. If the C with a stroke is doubling the tempo from 60 quarter note for comment time to 60 half note for alla breve, also halving the notation value because we don't use any more 16th notes in an alla breve. So basically the tempo is the same, but the performance is different. Then here indeed doubling the tempo is quite fast, even going further at 132 as Moschles did. The Presto seen from the comment time makes sense because it's doubling the tempo ordinario of comment time. The Presto seen on top of the alla breve sign with the C with the stroke would be doubling on doubling, so doubling for the alla breve, doubling for the Presto, which is perhaps one doubling too far. So it's adding on top of each other, and we might just have to apply one of those elements, knowing that we are in a bridge period where some time signatures are being left out, and there is some confusion in that time. And perhaps, but that's just my honest opinion that I share with you here in this Presto, that's the case, and that could be an explanation why this 132 for the quarter note is after all not so surprisingly. And it doesn't give us a Presto feel at the beginning, but the Presto is just an indication for the performer that the tempo should be doubled according to the tempo ordinario of comment time. So to end this video with, if we would go to today's performance, like for instance that of Barenboim, I can share with you 10 seconds here. Then we not only hear a totally different piece, and if you have listened to my performance, you might now get a second shock because it's really fast. But imagine that we would in a class of music theory and our teacher would say to note down, to make a notation for the way Barenboim plays this piece in, and imagine that we don't know the piece. No one of us would come up with the notation Beethoven used. In my performance, however, and I'm not saying that I'm playing it more correctly than Barenboim, there's no right or wrong here. Every performer should translate the music as he or she feels it. But in my performance, the chances are really big that you come up with the notation that Beethoven used, because you will hear quarter notes in the beginning. I will re-record that piece in that one tempo of Czerny 152. I will do it decently with those microphones, upload that on Monday, and so compare those two recordings, because 152 for the quarter note, again much lower than Barenboim, but it gives a totally other piece, and might be the reason that Czerny came back from that as being too fast. Who knows? Anyway. That was a long video, and there is still so much more to cover here on this piece alone. But if this is your first time here on Authentic Sound and you're still with me here, then I guess this channel is for you. If that concept appeals to you, hit that subscribe button, and then we see each other very soon again. Bye.